United Nations warns of endless retaliation spiral in Israel-Iran conflict. Malaysia calls for stronger ASEAN-OIC actions on Myanmar crisis. Good afternoon and Salam Malaysia Madani. This is World Today. I'm Mohana Priya. United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres has warned against another cycle of destruction and retaliation following the US strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, which he said marked a perilous turn in the region.
The bombing of Iranian nuclear facilities by the United States marks a perilous turn in a region that is already reeling. From the outset of the crisis, I have repeatedly condemned any military escalation in the Middle East. The people of the region cannot endure another cycle of destruction. And yet, we now risk descending into a rat hole of retaliation after retaliation. To avoid it, diplomacy must prevail.
Director of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, also called for restraint as he voiced fears over potential widening of the conflict. He stressed that arms strikes on nuclear facilities should never take place and could result in radioactive releases with grave consequences within and beyond the boundaries of the state which has been attacked. Russia, China and Pakistan circulated a draft resolution with other Security Council members that calls for an immediate ceasefire in Iran. The text also condemns in the strongest terms the attacks against peaceful nuclear sites and facilities. But the Council is very much divided, with other members such as France and Britain instead calling for Iran to exercise restraint. On a similar note, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, is calling on Israel to end its military actions against Iran following weeks of escalating conflict between the two rivals. Now, the message comes as the Israel-Iran conflict continues to intensify with no signs of slowing. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, who attended the OIC meeting in Istanbul over the weekend, said the US and Israel had crossed a red line and warned Tehran would respond by all means necessary.
The Islamic Republic of Iran continue to defend Iran's territory, sovereignty, security and people by all means necessary against not just US military aggression, but also the reckless and unlawful actions of the Israeli regime.
While the ministers condemned Israel's actions in Iran, Syria and Lebanon, they did not mention the United States, which joined the conflict over the weekend. Yesterday, American forces carried out strikes on Iranian nuclear sites, reportedly with President Donald Trump's approval. Meanwhile, tensions are rising in the Gulf as Iran's parliament moves to shut down the Strait of Hormuz in response to US airstrikes on its nuclear facilities. Now, lawmakers in Tehran approved a measure to close the critical waterway after American forces targeted 3 Iranian nuclear sites. However, the move is not yet final, as the decision rests with Iran's Supreme National Security Council, the country's highest security body. A senior member of Parliament's National Security Commission said the legislative body supports the closure, but acknowledged that final authority lies with the council. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi refused to confirm whether the strait would be closed, saying that a variety of options are available to Iran. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most vital points for global oil shipments. Roughly 1/5 of the world's oil supply passes through it each day. A closure would send shockwaves through global energy markets and further escalate already soaring regional tensions. Now, Wall Street futures slipped today and oil prices briefly surged to 5-month highs as investors watched for signs of Iranian retaliation following US strikes on its nuclear sites. The mood across markets was tense but measured. There was no sign of panic selling, and the US dollar only saw a mild safe haven bid. Oil prices initially jumped more than 2% but soon pulled back from early peaks. Brent crude rose 1.9% to $78.46 a barrel, while US crude climbed 2% to $75.3. Investors remain focused on what comes next from Tehran. Much depends on the Strait of Hormuz, a critical choke point for global oil. Now, roughly 20% of the world's oil supply flows through the 33-kilometer wide channel. For now, equity markets are holding up. S&P 500 futures are down 0.3%, while Nasdaq futures have slipped 0.5%, both recovering from sharper earlier losses. In the currency markets, the dollar edged up 0.2% against the yen to 146.36, while the euro slipped 0.3% to 1.1485 US dollars. On another note, a total of 24 individuals, including 17 Malaysians who were evacuated from Iran following the escalating conflict, have safely arrived in the country. Malaysia Airlines flight MH781 carrying the evacuees landed at Kuala Lumpur International Airport, Terminal 1 at about 11 p.m. last night. The group comprised 17 Malaysians, 6 Iranian dependents of Malaysian citizens, and 1 Singaporean national. Malaysia's ambassador to Iran, Khairi Omar, who led the group, told the media around 12 Malaysians are still in Iran, and the Foreign Ministry is closely monitoring their situation to ensure their safety and well-being.
Kita ada sekumpulan pelajar, kita ada juga yang berkahwin dengan rakyat Iran di sana, dan di mana mereka berada, di Tehran ada sekumpulan, di Shiraz pun ada. Jadi pada masa ini mereka bergeraklah, mereka tak duduk setempat, so itu yang kita kena pastikan, yang kita tahu keberadaan mereka di mana.
The evacuation, coordinated by the Malaysian Embassy in Tehran, involved a 1,120-kilometer land journey to the Iran-Turkmenistan border. The Malaysian embassies in Ashgabat and Bangkok also facilitated flight arrangements from Ashgabat to Malaysia. Now, global airlines are reassessing routes and suspending flights across West Asia following U.S. airstrikes on Iran's nuclear sites. Rising tensions and the risk of missile or drone strikes have airlines on high alert. Singapore Airlines cancelled flights from Singapore to Dubai yesterday, calling the situation fluid and citing updated security assessments. The route through West Asia has grown in importance for Asia-Europe travel since Russian and Ukrainian airspace became off-limits due to the war. Flight tracking data from Flight Radar 24 showed a noticeable absence of commercial aircraft over Iran, Iraq, Syria and Israel. Air France KLM also cancelled flights to Dubai and Riyadh on both Sunday and Monday, while British Airways halted services to Dubai and Doha yesterday. The airline said it was reviewing the situation for future flights. Safe Airspace, a flight risk monitoring service run by Ops Group, warned that U.S. attacks on Iranian nuclear sites could raise threats to American operators in the region. Adding to concerns, oil prices jumped after the U.S. strikes, increasing pressure on airlines already facing higher jet fuel costs. Now, protests are erupting around the world in response to Israel's strikes on Iran and the U.S. decision to join in the conflict. In Washington, demonstrators gathered outside the White House calling on the Trump administration to halt its military involvement in the region. Many accused the U.S. of escalating the conflict by targeting Iran's nuclear facilities. In New York, hundreds marched through the streets of Manhattan, chanting "No war on Iran." Protesters there criticized the U.S.-Israel alliance and warned of a wider regional war. Meanwhile, in Paris, protesters gathered in the city center demanding an end to the hostilities between Israel and Iran. Many condemned the U.S. airstrikes, calling them the most significant Western military action against Iran since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Over in India, demonstrators marched in Kolkata. Members of the Socialist Unity Centre of India, a regional political group, led the protest, denouncing what they called unjustified aggression by the US and Israel. Still ahead, suicide attack in Damascus church kills at least 22.
Guna mentol jimat tenaga untuk lebih jimat.
Welcome back. As ASEAN chair, Malaysia has called for enhanced collaboration between ASEAN and the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, to address the deteriorating situation in Myanmar. Focus must be given on ending violence, alleviating the humanitarian crisis, and supporting long-term peace in the country. Delivering a statement at the OIC contact group on Rohingya Muslims of Myanmar in Istanbul, Turkey, Foreign Minister Datuk Sri Mohamad Hassan said Malaysia is deeply concerned about the situation in Myanmar, particularly the plight of displaced Rohingyas, and stressed the need to ensure their safe, dignified and sustained return to Rakhine State. He noted that Malaysia has identified 3 key priorities, which are to promote inclusive political dialogue, ensure the cessation of violence and to scale up humanitarian assistance. He added Malaysia encourages greater engagement between the OIC member states and the stakeholders while focusing on ending the violence and alleviating the humanitarian crisis with a view of supporting peace in Myanmar. Such inclusive engagement would lay important groundwork for deeper cooperation on shared priorities. At least 22 people were killed in a suicide attack on a church in Damascus, Syria. The authorities blamed a member of the Daesh group for the unprecedented incident. The international community condemned the attack, the first of its kind in the Syrian capital since Bashar al-Assad was toppled from leadership in December. Security remains one of the greatest challenges for Syria's new authorities, whom the international community has repeatedly urged to protect minorities. The Interior Ministry said a suicide attacker affiliated with the Daesh group entered the St. Elias Church in the Dwela area and opened fire before blowing himself up with an explosives belt. The blast sparked panic and fear in the church, which had been full of worshippers, including children and the elderly. A health ministry statement said at least 22 people had been killed and dozens wounded, raising an earlier toll of 20 dead. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said it was the first suicide attack inside a church in Syria since the civil war erupted in 2011. United Nations Special Envoy for Syria, Geir Pedersen, expressed outrage at the heinous crime, calling for a full investigation. Turkey, meanwhile, expressed confidence that Syrians would stay united in their fight against organizations that seek to sow chaos in the country. Ukraine's top military commander has vowed to increase the scale and depth of strikes on Russia, saying Kiev would not sit idly by while Moscow prolonged its 3-year invasion. Diplomatic efforts to end the war have stalled in recent weeks. The last direct meeting between the two sides was almost 3 weeks ago, and no follow-up talks have been scheduled. According to officials, Russian attacks on Ukraine have killed dozens of people during the interim, including in the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrsky said Ukraine will not just sit in defense and will continue its strikes on Russian military targets, which he said had proved effective. Ukraine has launched strikes on Russia throughout the war, targeting energy and military infrastructure, sometimes hundreds of kilometers from the front line. Kiev claimed that the strikes are a fair response to Russian attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure and civilians. Now, NATO has signed off on a pledge to ramp up defense spending before its upcoming summit, but Madrid insisted it will not need to hit the 5% of GDP demanded by US President Donald Trump. Now, the claim by Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez sets up a potential clash with Trump, who has pressured allies to commit to that headline figure when they meet for the 2-day gathering starting tomorrow in The Hague. Multiple diplomats at NATO said the agreement set to be unveiled at the summit had gone through with the approval of all 32 nations, and there was no exemption for Madrid. But within minutes, Sanchez came out saying he had struck an accord with NATO that would see his country keep respecting its commitments without having to raise its defense spending to 5% of gross domestic product.
Ruedas de prensa. Nosotros entendemos la dificultad del contexto geopolítico, respetamos, como no puede ser de otra manera, plenamente el deseo legítimo de otros países de aumentar su inversión en defensa, si así lo quisieran, pero nosotros no vamos a hacerlo. Y no vamos a hacerlo por 3 razones fundamentales que me gustaría compartirles brevemente. En primer lugar, porque en nuestro caso, un 5% del Producto Interior Bruto de gasto en defensa sería desproporcionado e innecesario.
A 27-year-old bride was killed when gunmen attacked a wedding party in a village in southeastern France, with one of the assailants also dying during the assault. 3 other people, including a child, were injured in the attack, which plunged the tiny, picturesque village of Gold into shock. The newlyweds were leaving the party when they were confronted by masked assailants who opened fire before one of them was hit in return. According to the prosecutor, the attackers, who arrived by car, carried several weapons and they fled on foot after the attack. The police noted that a total of 28 people were present in the village hall at the time of the incident. According to the village mayor, the hall had been booked by the couple in March. The authorities have opened an investigation into murder and attempted murder by an organized gang. According to a source close to the investigation, the violence might be linked to possible drug-related score settling. Dozens of police and a helicopter have been mobilized to track down the gunman. Over in Greece, a forest blaze forced officials to clear hundreds of asylum seekers from a reception camp on the Greek island of Chios. Chios, of Turkey's west coast, is a frequent landing point for migrants trying to reach Europe. Civil Protection said that more than a dozen nearby villages were also emptied as a precaution after the fire flared yesterday morning. According to Fire Service, about 100 firefighters, 30 fire engines, 2 water bombers and 10 helicopters battled the flames. Teams from Athens also arrived to back local crew as strong winds fanned the blaze. The fire service counted about 50 fires nationwide yesterday and warned that danger levels would remain very high through Monday. Scientists say Greece's dry, windy summers and rising temperatures linked to climate change make the country especially prone to wildfires. In sports, Lik Hao seals double gold at Asia Para Badminton Championships.
Lebih menjimatkan memasak dengan jerit penuh.
Malaysia's para badminton superstar Chia Lik Hao showed again why he is the world number one, pulling off a sensational double victory at the 2025 Asia Para Badminton Championships in Korat, Thailand. Lik Hao, competing in the SU5 upper limb impairment category, was in fiery form as he clinched the men's singles title, outlasting his arch-rival from Indonesia, Deva Andrimushti, in a thrilling three-set showdown 21-19, 15-21, 21-18, with the match lasting 58 minutes. The two-time Paralympic gold medalist was not done yet. He then teamed up with Muhammad Faris Anwar in the men's doubles SU5, delivering a commanding performance to defeat India's Hardik Makar and Rutik Gragupati in straight sets, 21-14, 21-8. Also flying the Malaysian flag high was Muhammad Amin Burhanuddin, who dominated the men's singles SL4 lower limb impairment category by taking down India's Surya Kant Yadav with a solid 23-21, 21-15 win. However, Muhammad Ikhwan Ramli, battling in the men's wheelchair singles WH1, had to settle for runner-up after falling to China's Ku Zimo 9-21, 16-21. Meanwhile, national powerlifter Bonnie Bunyagustin faced little opposition to win the gold medal as he dominated the 2025 Para Powerlifting World Cup in Beijing, China. The Sarawakian clinched the gold with a best lift of 215 kilograms at the China Administration of Sports for persons with disabilities. However, Bonnie's effort is a far cry from his world record of 232 kilograms he set when defending his Paralympic Games gold medal in Paris 2024. Jesus Cuvas Cineros of Cuba won the silver with a lift of 175 kilograms, while Ramubai Bambava of India took the bronze with a 151 kilogram effort. Malaysia's young rider Muhammad Hakim Danish Ramli had to settle for second place after being overtaken at the last moment in race 2 of round 4 of the 2025 Red Bull MotoGP Rookies Cup at the Mugello circuit in Florence, Italy. Hakim Danish started from 5th on the grid and endured a tough race before being edged out by just 0.011 seconds by Indonesian rider Veda Pratama, who won the race with a time of 26 minutes 44.347 seconds. Third place went to Bernat Fernandez of Spain. Veda also claimed a double victory after winning race 1, while Hakim Danish finished in 13th position. Nevertheless, Hakim Danish's position as championship leader remains unshaken as he widened the points gap by accumulating 148 points ahead of Spain's Brian Uertate in second place with 116 points, while Veda is third with 92 points. Next, the 17-year-old Malaysian rider is scheduled to to continue the championship at the Schanzhring circuit in Saxony, Germany on 12th and 13th July. Meanwhile, Ducati's Marc Marquez won the Italian Grand Prix after a dogfight for podium places at the Mugello circuit, taking the checkered flag ahead of his brother Alex to maintain his iron grip on the Riders' Championship. Fresh from claiming his historic 100th career pole with a blistering lap record and Saturday's unlikely sprint victory, Marc found himself locked in a fraternal battle with Alex, a running theme this season. Gresini Racing's Alex briefly led the race early on before Marc took control, while Fabio Giantantonio of VR46 Racing claimed third place after snatching the final podium spot from his Italian compatriot Francesco Bagnaia. Home favourite Bagnaia also led the race in the initial stages, but the Italian, who had just won the last 3 races at Mugello, was overshadowed by the Marquez brothers and could only finish 4th in front of his home fans. Marc's victory was also 93rd win of his career across all classes, matching his motorcycle number. And the Spaniard celebrated by planting a Ducati flag in front of the home fans who once saw him as a rival when he was with Honda. And on to football. Real Madrid shrugged off an early red card to defeat Mexico's Pachuca 3-1 and take a big step towards the knockout stage of the Club World Cup. Now, the result leaves Madrid on top of Group H with 4 points, while Pachuca are eliminated after 2 defeats. And that wraps up World Today. In our top story, United Nations warns of endless retaliation spiral in Israel-Iran conflict. Tune in to Malaysia Tonight coming up at 8:30 p.m. on TV1 and saluran Berita RTM. Till then, I'm Mona Priya, Malaysia MADANI, Rakyat Disantuni. Thank you for your company.